The town of Cedar Ridge sat like a weathered scar against the Montana mountainside, its wooden buildings huddled together as if seeking warmth from the perpetual cold that swept down from the peaks. It was 1887, and the harsh winter had just broken into an equally unforgiving spring. The earth remained hard as iron beneath a thin layer of mud, and the wind carried the scent of pine and desperation in equal measure. In the narrow alley behind Morrison's Laundry, a small figure moved between the steaming washtubs, her thin arms straining to lift the heavy bundles of miners' clothing. Elizabeth Lizzie Hartwell was 23 years old, though most folks in town would have guessed younger from her slight build. Standing barely 5 feet tall and weighing no more than 90 pounds soaking wet, she was often mistaken for a child from a distance. "Careful with them sheets, girl, Mrs." Morrison's sharp voice cut through the steam. "You drop 'em in the mud, and you'll be washing them again on your own time." Lizzie nodded silently, adjusting her grip on the bundle. She had learned long ago that words were a luxury she couldn't afford. Every breath was better saved for the work that kept a roof over her head and a few coins in her pocket. The other washerwomen whispered as she passed, their voices carrying despite their attempts at discretion. "Poor little thing," Martha Hensley murmured, elbow deep in lye soap. "Been here 3 years now, ever since her folks died of the fever. No family to speak of. No prospects neither." "Who'd want her anyway?" Agnes Cooper replied, not bothering to lower her voice. "A man needs a wife who can pull her weight, birth his children, work the homestead. That little sparrow would snap in half at the first strong wind." Lizzie's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes on the ground. She had heard it all before, how she was too small, too weak, too fragile for the harsh realities of frontier life. The men in town looked through her as if she were invisible, their eyes seeking the sturdy German girls or the robust daughters of ranchers. Even the desperate miners seeking mail-order brides passed her by, shaking their heads at her diminutive frame. After 14 hours of back-breaking labor, Lizzie collected her day's wages, $2.30, and made her way to the boarding house where she rented a corner of the attic. The climb up 3 flights of stairs left her breathless, her legs trembling with exhaustion. Her tiny room was barely larger than a closet, containing only a narrow cot, a wash basin, and a small trunk that held her few possessions. She counted out coins for next week's rent, setting aside a precious few for food. There would be enough for bread, some salt pork, and perhaps a few potatoes if Mr. Chen at the general store was feeling generous. Her stomach growled in protest at the meager prospects, but she ignored it with practiced ease. Through the small, grimy window, she could see the mountains looming in the distance, their peaks still crowned with snow. Sometimes she wondered what lay beyond them, in those wild spaces where civilization hadn't yet carved its mark, but such thoughts were foolish dreams. She was trapped here as surely as if she were shackled, bound by necessity and the cruel arithmetic of survival. The next morning brought the weekly market day. When ranchers and trappers came down from the hills to trade, Lizzie made her way through the crowded streets, clutching her worn shawl against the cold wind. She had saved for weeks to buy a new pair of boots, her current ones being more whole than leather. At the cobbler's stall, she held up the boots she had selected, the smallest pair available, still too large for her feet but serviceable with thick socks. $4, the cobbler stated flatly. "The sign says $3.50. Lizzie ventured quietly. The man looked her up and down with undisguised contempt. "That's for regular customers. You want 'em or not?" Before she could respond, a group of ranch hands nearby burst into laughter. "Hey, Jake," one called out. "Looks like someone's shopping for their daughter. Oh, wait, that's the Hartwell girl." "Daughter nothing," Jake replied, spitting tobacco juice into the mud. "My daughter's 12 and already bigger than that one. What man would bed something so small? Like coupling with a child?" The crowd's laughter rang in Lizzie's ears as shame burned her cheeks. She fumbled with her coins, hands shaking as she tried to count out the money. In her haste, several coins fell, scattering in the mud at her feet. As she knelt to retrieve them, more comments flew overhead like arrows finding their mark. Look at her scrambling in the dirt, like a little mouse. Even if someone was fool enough to marry her, she'd never survive birthing. Too narrow in the hips, too weak in the constitution. Might as well take holy orders, girl. Ain't no man in his right mind gonna want what you're offering. Lizzie's vision blurred with unshed tears as she gathered the last of her coins. The cobbler had already turned to another customer, dismissing her entirely. She straightened slowly, her money clutched in muddy fingers, and turned to find another path through the crowd. That's when she saw him. He stood at the edge of the market square like a mountain made flesh, 6.5 feet tall, shoulders broad as an oak beam. Dressed in buckskins that had seen better days, his dark hair hung to his shoulders, streaked with premature silver, and his face was weathered by wind and sun into something that looked carved from the very granite of the peaks above. A full beard covered the lower half of his face, but couldn't hide the scars that marked him as a man who had seen violence and survived it. The crowd parted around him instinctively, the way sheep avoid a wolf. Mothers pulled their children closer, and even the bold ranch hands found somewhere else to look. This was Jonas McCready, the mountain man who came to town perhaps twice a year, trading pelts and purchasing supplies before disappearing back into the wilderness. "It's him," someone whispered. "The wild man from Devil's Canyon. I heard he killed a grizzly with nothing but a knife," another voice added. "Killed more than bears, from what I've been told. They say he went mad after his family died. Lives like an animal up there." Jonas paid no attention to the whispers. His gray eyes, the color of winter storm clouds, were fixed on the small figure still standing in the mud. Coins clutched in her hands, tears tracking down her cheeks. He watched as she tried once more to approach the cobbler, only to be shouldered aside by larger customers. Watched as she finally gave up, turning away with her old, ruined boots still on her feet. Something shifted in his expression, a tightening around the eyes, a slight downturn of his mouth beneath the beard. He had seen many things in his 41 years, but something about this particular cruelty, this casual dismissal of another human being, struck a chord long buried. As Lizzie made her way toward the edge of the market, hoping to escape the cruel laughter that followed her like a shadow, she found her path suddenly blocked. She looked up and up and up into the face of the mountain man everyone feared. This close. She could see that his eyes weren't cold as she'd expected, but held depths of something she couldn't name. Pain, perhaps, or understanding. He smelled of wood smoke and pine resin, of leather and the wild places beyond civilization's reach. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the tiny woman who everyone mocked and the giant everyone feared. The market noise faded to a distant hum. Then Jonas McCready did something that would set tongues wagging for months to come. He reached into his belt pouch and pulled out a gold coin. Pressing it into Lizzie's muddy hand, his fingers were gentle despite their size, careful not to hurt her. "For your boots," he said, his voice like distant thunder, deep and rumbling. "And don't let them charge you more than fair price." Before she could speak, before she could even process what had happened, he turned and strode away, leaving her standing there with $20 in gold, more money than she'd held at one time in her entire life. The market had gone silent, everyone staring at the spectacle. Then the whispers started, rising like a tide. "Did you see that? He gave her gold. What's his game? What would a man like that want with—" So, maybe he feels sorry for her. Even wild men have hearts, I suppose. But Lizzie barely heard them. She was watching the broad back of Jonas McCready disappear into the crowd, her heart pounding with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite hope, but lived somewhere in the strange territory between. The mountains above Cedar Ridge were a different world entirely, 20 miles from town, where the wagon roads ended and only game trails continued. Jonas McCready had made his home in a cave that nature had carved from the living rock centuries before. He'd improved it over the years, building a stone wall across the entrance with a proper door, adding a chimney for the smoke from his fire. From his doorway, he could see for miles across the valley below, watch the eagles soar at eye level, and track the movement of elk herds through the meadows. A cold stream ran 50 yards from his dwelling, providing fresh water and the occasional trout. His nearest neighbor was a family of black bears that denned a mile away, and they had learned to give each other respectful distance. Jonas sat on a flat boulder outside his cave, working oil into a beaver trap while his mind wandered back to town. He couldn't shake the image of that small woman standing in the mud, counting coins while grown men mocked her for the crime of being born small. It stirred memories he'd rather keep buried. Memories of another woman, another time, when he'd failed to protect what mattered most. The gold coin had been an impulse, one he was already regretting. He had no business involving himself in town affairs, no right to draw attention to someone who clearly had troubles enough. But something about her eyes, brown as autumn leaves, holding dignity despite the tears, had moved him to action. He set the trap aside and stood, stretching muscles grown stiff from sitting. At 6 feet 6 inches and 240 pounds, he was used to being the largest man in any gathering. Up here in the mountains, that size was an asset. Down in civilization, it only made folks nervous. 3 weeks passed before necessity drove him back to Cedar Ridge. His supplies of ammunition were running low, and he needed salt for preserving meat, flour for the occasional pan bread, and coffee, the one civilized luxury he allowed himself. He'd loaded his pack mule with pelts, beaver, mink, and a particularly fine black bear hide that should fetch good money. The town seemed more crowded than usual as he made his way down Main Street. It was Saturday afternoon, and the Red Dog Saloon was doing brisk business. Jonas kept to the shadows as much as a man his size could, hoping to complete his business quickly and return to the solitude of the mountains. He was negotiating with Samuel Hoffman at the trading post when he heard the commotion outside. Raised voices, the sound of scuffling, and then a woman's cry of distress. Jonas continued examining ammunition, trying to ignore it. Town problems weren't his problems. But then he heard the laughter, that same cruel, mocking sound from 3 weeks ago, and found himself moving toward the door without conscious decision. In the street, a crowd had gathered around some entertainment. Jonas pushed through, people scrambling aside when they recognized him, and found what he'd feared at the center. Lizzie Hartwell was on her knees in the dirt, trying to gather scattered laundry while a drunk miner named Carl Brennan stood over her, whiskey bottle in one hand, her laundry basket upended at his feet. "Clumsy little mouse," Brennan slurred, kicking at the clean clothes. "Can't even carry a basket without dropping it. What use are you to anyone?" "Please," Lizzie whispered, trying to rescue a white shirt from the mud. "These belong to customers. I'll have to wash them again." "Then wash 'em." Brennan grabbed her thin wrist, hauling her to her feet. "Unless you want to earn your money some other way, even a runt like you could—" He never finished the sentence. A hand the size of a ham closed around his shoulder, spinning him around. Brennan found himself looking up into Jonas McCready's face, and even through his drunken haze, he recognized danger. "Let her go," Jonas said quietly. The very softness of his voice made it more menacing than any shout. Brennan released Lizzie's wrist so fast she stumbled. The miner backed away, suddenly finding his courage at a safe distance. "What's she to you, mountain man? You claiming this scrawny piece?" Jonas didn't answer. He knelt, a movement surprisingly graceful for such a large man, and began gathering the scattered laundry. His huge hands were gentle with the delicate fabrics, shaking out the mud as best he could before placing them back in the basket. Lizzie stood frozen, watching this giant tend to her washing with such care. When he finished, he straightened and held the basket out to her. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely audible. Jonas studied her for a moment. Up close, he could see the exhaustion written in the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she took the basket. She was wearing new boots. He noticed, the ones his gold had bought, though they were still too large for her small feet. The crowd was watching, waiting for something more dramatic. When Jonas turned to face them, several people took involuntary steps backward. "Anyone else want to bother this woman?" he asked conversationally. Silence answered him. Jonas nodded once, then looked back at Lizzie. "You need escort back to the laundry?" She shook her head quickly. "No, "Thank you, but I'll be fine." He could see she was lying. She was shaking like an aspen leaf, but he didn't push. Instead, he turned and walked back toward the trading post, leaving whispers in his wake. "Did you see that? He defended her. Maybe he's sweet on her. Wouldn't that be something? A man like that would break her in half. It's unnatural." Inside the trading post, Samuel Hoffman was eager to gossip. "That was quite a show. McCready, didn't know you had a soft spot for our little Lizzie." Jonas placed his ammunition on the counter. "Just don't like seeing folks bullied?" Hoffman tallied up the purchases. "She's a hard worker, that one. Shame about her circumstances. Been trying to save enough to leave town. From what I hear, but she barely makes enough to survive. Some of the meaner folks take pleasure in making her life harder." "Why?" Jonas found himself asking. Hoffman shrugged. "Why do folks mock what's different? She's small. She's alone. She's defenseless. Makes some people feel bigger to push down those who can't push back." Jonas paid for his supplies, his mind churning. As he loaded his mule outside, he caught sight of Lizzie hurrying down an alley. Basket clutched to her chest, head down. Even from a distance, he could see she was crying. He should leave, should head back to his mountain where life was simple and he didn't have to feel responsible for anyone but himself. But something kept him standing there, watching her disappear into the maze of back streets. "You know," a voice said beside him, "she lives in the boarding house on 3rd Street, the Widow Thompson's place, just in case you were wondering." Jonas turned to find Mary Chen, wife of the general store owner, smiling up at him knowingly. She was one of the few people in town who didn't fear him, perhaps because she and her husband had faced their own share of prejudice. "I wasn't wondering," Jonas rumbled. "Of course not." Mary's smile widened. "But if you were, you might also want to know that she works 7 days a week, dawn to dark, never complains, never asks for help. Too proud, that one. Or maybe too used to disappointment." Jonas made a noncommittal sound and turned back to his mule. "She was engaged once." Mary continued, seemingly talking to the air. 2 years ago, a clerk at the bank, Herbert Grayson, courted her for 6 months, then broke it off the week before the wedding. Said his mother convinced him he needed a stronger wife. Someone who could give him sons. Lizzie hasn't walked out with anyone since. "Why are you telling me this?" Jonas asked, irritation creeping into his voice. Mary shrugged delicately. "No reason, just making conversation. Although," she paused, then added, "a woman like that could surprise you. The small ones often have the strongest spirits. They have to survive in a world built for bigger folks." She walked away before Jonas could respond, leaving him standing in the street with his loaded mule and too many thoughts. As he headed out of town, Jonas passed the saloon where Carl Brennan was holding court, retelling the story of his encounter with embellishments. Through the window, Jonas could see him gesturing wildly, playing the victim. "Mountain Man's got his eye on the mouse," Brennan was saying. "Probably plans to take her up to his cave, make her his woman. Can you imagine? She's so small he could snap her like a twig." The other drunks laughed uproariously. "Maybe he likes them small," someone suggested. "Easier to control." "Control nothing," another voice chimed in. "She'd freeze to death first winter. Those mountain winters are brutal, and she's got no meat on her bones." Jonas forced himself to keep walking. It wasn't his business. He'd helped her twice now, and that was more than he'd involved himself with anyone in years. He had pelts to prepare, traps to check, a life to live that didn't include worrying about a tiny woman with sad eyes and proud shoulders. But as he climbed the trail toward home, he found himself thinking about what Mary Chen had said, about strong spirits in small bodies, about survival against odds. The sun was setting by the time he reached his cave, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. He unloaded his supplies methodically, storing everything in its proper place. But his usual peace wouldn't come. Instead, he kept seeing Lizzie Hartwell on her knees in the mud, trying to save other people's laundry while they laughed at her struggles. That night, Jonas sat by his fire and did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He pulled out the small carved wooden box he kept buried beneath his bedroll and opened it. Inside were 3 items: a gold wedding ring, a child's silver rattle, and a daguerreotype of a woman holding a baby. Sarah had been small too, though not as tiny as Lizzie Hartwell. She'd been delicate, refined, a doctor's daughter who'd fallen in love with a rough trapper against all advice. They'd had 2 years together before the fever took her and their infant son, leaving Jonas with nothing but memories and guilt. He'd retreated to the mountains then, becoming more legend than man, letting the townspeople create their stories about the wild hermit of Devil's Canyon. It was easier than facing the world that had taken everything from him. But now, for the first time in years, something had pierced through his armor of solitude. Not attraction. He wasn't fool enough to think that. It was something else, something more dangerous. It was the desire to protect. Jonas closed the box and returned it to its hiding place. Tomorrow he would check his trap lines. Tomorrow he would hunt. Tomorrow he would continue the life he'd chosen, alone and free from the complications of caring. But tonight, as snow began to fall outside his cave, he wondered if Lizzie Hartwell had made it home safely with her muddy laundry. Wondered if anyone had helped her wash those clothes again. Wondered if she had enough food, enough warmth, enough hope to make it through another day in a world that seemed determined to crush her spirit. And deep in his chest, in the place he'd thought frozen beyond feeling, something stirred to life, a dangerous warmth that threatened everything he'd built in 5 years of careful isolation. The blizzard struck without warning on a Tuesday afternoon in late November. Jonas had seen the signs, the way the clouds stacked against the peaks, the restless behavior of the wildlife, and had prepared accordingly. His cave was stocked with firewood and preserved meat, his water barrels full. He could wait out any storm in relative comfort. But as he watched the snow fall in thick curtains across the valley, his thoughts turned to town, to folks who might not have seen the signs, who might be caught unprepared, to one person in particular who barely had enough coal for regular nights, let alone a blizzard. He tried to ignore it, tried to focus on mending his gear, on the book he'd been reading by lamplight, but as the wind howled louder and the temperature plummeted, he found himself pacing his cave like the caged bears he'd seen at a traveling show once. By nightfall, the storm had become a monster. Snow fell so thick you couldn't see 10 feet, and the wind drove it horizontal, cutting exposed skin like tiny knives. The temperature had dropped well below 0. Jonas lasted until midnight before cursing himself for a fool and beginning to prepare. He loaded a pack with essentials: blankets, food, a small tent in case he got caught out. He dressed in his warmest furs, strapped on snowshoes, and headed into the tempest. The journey that normally took 3 hours took nearly 8. He had to feel his way down the mountain, following familiar landmarks by touch more than sight. Several times he had to take shelter behind rocks, waiting for the worst gusts to pass. By the time he reached the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, dawn was breaking gray and bitter through the storm. The town looked like a ghost of itself, buried under drifts that reached the first-floor windows of some buildings. A few chimneys leaked smoke, but many were cold. Jonas made his way through the deserted streets, the only sound the howling wind and the creak of snow-laden roofs. The boarding house on 3rd Street looked particularly forlorn. No smoke rose from its chimney, and snow had drifted against the front door. Jonas waded through the drifts and pounded on the entrance. "Mrs. Thompson, open up!" It took several minutes before he heard movement inside. The door cracked open, and the widow Thompson peered out, her face pinched with cold. "Mr. McCready, Lord have mercy, what are you doing out in this?" "Checking on folks," he said gruffly. "You got heat? Coal ran out yesterday. We're making do." She clutched a thin shawl around her shoulders, shivering. "How many boarders you got?" "6, including—" "Why are you asking?" Jonas was already pushing past her into the frigid hallway. "Which room is Lizzie Hartwell's?" "Mrs." Thompson's eyes widened. "The attic, but—" He was already climbing the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. The temperature dropped with each flight, and by the time he reached the attic, his breath was fogging in the air. The narrow hallway had 3 doors. He knocked on each until a weak voice answered from the last one. "Come in." The door wasn't locked. The lock had broken long ago and never been fixed. Jonas ducked through the low doorway and stopped short. The tiny room was an icebox. Frost covered the inside of the single window, and he could see his breath. On the narrow cot, buried under what looked like every piece of fabric she owned, lay Lizzie. Her face was pale as the snow outside, her lips tinged blue. "Mr. MacCready," her voice was barely a whisper. "What? How?" Jonas crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling off his heavy fur coat. "When did you eat last?" Yesterday morning, I think." She tried to sit up but couldn't manage it. "The storm. Couldn't get to work." He wrapped his coat around her, then scooped her up, blankets and all. She weighed nothing, a bundle of cloth with barely a person inside. "What are you doing?" she protested weakly. "Saving your stubborn life," he growled, heading for the door. "Mrs. Thompson," he bellowed down the stairs. "I'm taking Miss Hartwell. She'll freeze if she stays here." The widow appeared at the bottom of the stairs, wringing her hands. Taking her where? Somewhere warm. He was already heading for the door. "Tell anyone who asks she'll be safe." But the storm? "I made it here. I'll make it back." Outside, the blizzard had intensified. Jonas paused in the doorway, adjusting his hold on Lizzie and pulling the furs more securely around her. "You can't carry me all the way to—" She didn't finish, not knowing where he intended to go. "Watch me," he said grimly, and plunged into the storm. The return journey was a nightmare. The wind fought him for every step, trying to tear Lizzie from his arms. Snow blinded him, filled his nose and mouth. His snowshoes caught on hidden obstacles, nearly sending them both tumbling. But Jonas pressed on with a single-minded determination. Using strength built from years of hard living, Lizzie drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of warmth surrounding her despite the cold, of strong arms that never faltered, of a deep voice that rumbled reassurances she couldn't quite hear over the wind. Hours passed. Jonas's muscles burned. His lungs ached from the cold air, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not when he could feel how cold she was even through the furs. Not when her breathing was so shallow against his chest. Finally, blessedly, the familiar rock face of his cave loomed through the snow. Jonas staggered the last few yards and shouldered through the entrance, nearly collapsing once they were inside. The fire had died to embers, but the cave still held warmth. Jonas laid Lizzie on his bed, a proper wooden frame with a thick straw mattress and bearskin covers, and immediately set about building up the fire. "So cold," Lizzie murmured, starting to shiver violently as her body began to warm. "That's good," Jonas said, adding wood to the growing flames. "Means you're warming up. Here." He ladled water from the pot he kept by the fire, mixing in some precious sugar. "Drink this." She could barely hold the cup, so he supported it, helping her take small sips. Color began returning to her face, though she still shook with cold. "Why?" she asked between chattering teeth. "Why did you come for me?" Jonas busied himself pulling off her wet boots, trying not to think too hard about the answer. "Figured you might need help." "But the storm. You could have died. So could you." He found dry wool socks in his supplies and gently pulled them onto her small feet. They were comically large on her, but warm. "When's the last time you had a proper meal?" Lizzie looked away. "I eat enough." "That's not what I asked." She was quiet for a moment, then admitted, "Food's been scarce. With the storm coming, prices went up. I had to choose between coal and food, and I thought—" She trailed off. "You thought you'd freeze slower than you'd starve." Jonas finished grimly. He moved to his food stores, pulling out dried meat, hardtack, and a precious jar of preserved berries. As he prepared a simple meal, he was aware of Lizzie watching him, still bundled in his furs on his bed. I don't understand you, she said quietly. Everyone in town says you're a hermit, that you hate people, but you've helped me 3 times now. Jonas considered his words as he worked. Don't hate people. Just find it easier to live without them. Then why? Because someone should. The words came out harsher than intended. He softened his tone. You work hard. Don't bother anyone. Try to make an honest living. Doesn't seem right. Folks treating you like they do. Because I'm small. There was no self-pity in her voice. Just tired acceptance. Jonas brought her the plate of food. Being small isn't a failing. Isn't it? She took a bite of meat, closing her eyes at the taste. I can't do the work of a normal woman. Can't lift what needs lifting. Can't be what anyone needs. Says who? Everyone. She looked up at him, those brown eyes holding years of hurt. Even Herbert said. She stopped, flushing. The bank clerk. It wasn't a question. Mary Chen's gossip had stuck with him. Lizzie nodded miserably. He said his mother was right, that I was too fragile to be a proper wife, too small to bear children safely, that he needed someone sturdier. Jonas felt a flash of anger toward this Herbert he'd never met. Man was a fool. Was he? Lizzie set down the plate, though she'd barely eaten half. Look at me. You had to carry me here like a child. I couldn't even keep myself warm in a storm. You were in a room with no heat, with barely any food in your belly, trying to survive on your own with no help from anyone. Jonas pushed the plate back toward her. Eat, and that's not a request. Something in his tone must have reached her, because she picked up the food again. They sat in silence while she finished the meal, the fire crackling and the wind howling outside. How long will the storm last? She asked finally. Jonas studied the cave entrance, where snow was already drifting inside despite the partial protection. 2 days, maybe 3. 3 days? Lizzie's eyes widened. But I have to get back. Mrs. Morrison will fire me if I miss work. And my rent. No one's going anywhere in this. Jonas interrupted. Morrison's not going to fire anyone for missing work in the worst blizzard in 10 years. And your rent will keep. You don't understand. I can't afford. Stop. He fixed her with a steady gaze. You're here now. You're safe, warm, and fed. Whatever comes after the storm, we'll deal with then. For now, you rest. Lizzie looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion was winning. Her eyelids drooped, and she swayed slightly where she sat. Sleep, Jonas said more gently. You're safe here. Where will you sleep? She asked drowsily. Got a bedroll by the fire, slept in worse places. She was already sliding down into the warm furs, her small form nearly disappearing in their depths. Thank you, she whispered. No one's ever. Thank you. Jonas watched her drift off, her breathing evening out, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cave was warm and quiet. He settled by the fire with his rifle, ostensibly cleaning it but really keeping watch. Not against any external threat. Nothing would move in this blizzard. But against his own turbulent thoughts. He'd broken his cardinal rule. He'd involved himself, taken responsibility for another person, brought her into his space, his sanctuary. And the worst part was, he didn't regret it, looking at her sleeping form, so small in his bed, trusting him completely despite barely knowing him. Jonas felt that dangerous warmth in his chest expand. He'd told himself he was just being decent, helping someone in need, but he knew it was more than that. Somewhere between that first glimpse of her crying in the market mud and carrying her through a blizzard, Lizzie Hartwell had slipped past his defenses, and Jonas Macready, who'd sworn never to care for anyone again, found himself in the terrifying position of wanting to protect this tiny, stubborn woman from every harsh word and cold night the world might throw at her. The storm howled on, but inside the cave, warmth and safety reigned, and for the first time in 5 years, Jonas didn't feel alone. The first morning dawned gray and bitter. With snow still falling steadily, Lizzie woke disoriented, surrounded by warmth and the scent of wood smoke and leather. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was. Then memory rushed back. The cold, The storm, strong arms carrying her through the blizzard. She sat up slowly, finding herself still wrapped in thick furs. Across the cave, Jonas crouched by the fire, stirring something in a pot. He'd changed clothes but looked tired, as if he hadn't slept. "Morning," he said without turning. "Coffee's almost ready." "You stayed up all night?" "Habit." He poured dark liquid into 2 tin cups. "Storm's still bad. We're not going anywhere today." Lizzie accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her small hands around the warm metal. "I'm sorry to be such trouble." Jonas finally looked at her, his gray eyes serious. "You're no trouble, and stop apologizing for existing." The bluntness of his words made her blink. She sipped her coffee, studying him over the rim. In the firelight, she could see the lines weathering had carved into his face, the silver threading through his dark hair. He moved with the careful efficiency of someone used to living alone, every action purposeful. "I should learn to help," she said. "If I'm to be here, I should be useful." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "All right. Can you cook?" "Some, Mrs. Morrison never let me near her kitchen, but I learned basics from my mother before." "Before she passed?" Jonas nodded. "Well, mountain cooking's simple enough. Come here." He showed her his food stores, smoked meat, dried beans, wild onions and herbs he'd gathered, flour and salt and precious sugar. Together they prepared a simple breakfast of pan bread and reheated stew from the night before. "You need to eat more," Jonas observed, watching her pick at her portion. "Body can't stay warm without fuel." "I'm not used to much," Lizzie admitted. "This seems like such bounty." "It's winter rations, nothing fancy. It's more meat than I see in a month." Jonas frowned but didn't comment. Instead, he showed her around the cave properly. It was larger than she'd realized, with the natural chambers extending back into the mountain. He'd turned one into a storage area, another into a workspace where he prepared pelts and maintained his gear. "You've made a real home here." Lizzie marveled, running her fingers along a shelf he'd carved into the rock wall. 5 years of improvements." He showed her the water barrel he kept filled from the stream, the ventilation hole that drew smoke from the fire. Everything a man needs. As the day progressed, Lizzie insisted on helping with chores. Jonas taught her to tend the fire properly, to ration wood for maximum heat. She watched him work on his traps, his large hands surprisingly delicate with the mechanisms. "Why trapping?" she asked, settling cross-legged near the fire. She'd found that if she stayed busy, she could almost forget the impropriety of being alone with a man in his dwelling. "It's honest work. Animals don't lie or cheat. The mountain doesn't care who you were before, only who you are now." He adjusted a spring with careful precision. "Why laundry?" It was what was available. A woman alone doesn't have many choices. And I was grateful, Mrs. Morrison would hire me despite... She gestured at herself. "Despite being perfectly capable?" Lizzie laughed, a sound rusty from disuse. "You're the only person who's ever called me that." "Then everyone else is blind." They worked in companionable silence for a while. Lizzie found herself stealing glances at him, trying to reconcile the gentle patience he showed with the fearsome reputation he had in town. When he caught her looking, she flushed and turned away. "Ask," he said simply. "Ask what? Whatever's got you staring, might as well get it out." Lizzie gathered her courage. "They say you killed a man. Several men." Jonas's hand stilled on the trap. "They say true. Why?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, 5 years ago, I had a cabin down near Beaver Creek. Had a wife, Sarah, baby boy, Thomas. Gang came through, looking for gold they thought I'd found. I was out checking traps." His voice was steady, but Lizzie saw his knuckles whiten where he gripped the trap. "Came back to smoke. They'd burned it all. Sarah and Thomas were..." He stopped, drew a breath. "I tracked them. Took 2 weeks. Found them holed up in an old mine. 7 men, and you." I did what needed doing. His gray eyes met hers, unflinching. Does that frighten you? Lizzie considered the question honestly. No, it makes me sad. For you, for your family. But frightened? No. Something passed over his face. Surprise, perhaps, or relief. Most folks see it different. Most folks haven't lost everything. She pulled the fur tighter around herself. I may not have lost the same way, but I understand being alone, having nothing left but surviving. Jonas studied her for a long moment. How old were you when your parents died? 16. Cholera took them both within days. I tried to keep our farm going, but a girl alone. She shrugged. The bank took it. I came to Cedar Ridge because I heard there was work, and found folks eager to remind you of your place. People need someone to look down on. Makes them feel taller. There was no bitterness in her voice, just weary acceptance. Jonas set aside the trap and added wood to the fire. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, but inside the cave was warm and safe. You're wrong, you know, he said quietly. About being weak. Am I? Strength isn't just about size. I've known big men who crumbled at the first hardship. You've been kicked down over and over, and you keep getting up, keep working, keep surviving. He met her eyes. That's strength. Lizzie felt tears prick her eyes. Sometimes I'm so tired of being strong. I know. His voice was gentle. But you don't have to be strong alone. Not anymore. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Lizzie looked away first, overwhelmed by the intensity in his gaze. That night, she insisted on helping prepare dinner. Jonas showed her how to make trail stew with dried vegetables and preserved meat, how to bake ash cakes in the coals. They ate by firelight while the storm raged on. Tell me about the mountains, Lizzie requested. What's it like in spring? Jonas's face softened. Green as Eden, wildflowers everywhere, Indian paintbrush, columbine, wild roses. Elk bring their calves down to the meadows. Bears come out hungry but peaceful if you respect their space. Streams run high with snowmelt, and the fishing. He smiled. You can pull trout long as your arm from pools so clear you can see bottom. It sounds beautiful. It is hard, but beautiful. Everything worth having is. As the evening wore on, Lizzie found herself fighting yawns. The warmth, the food, the unexpected safety all combined to make her drowsy. Take the bed again, Jonas said, noticing. I couldn't. You must be exhausted. I've slept on rock floors in worse weather. The bed's yours while you're here. We could. She stopped, face flaming at what she'd almost suggested. Could what? His voice held gentle amusement. Share, she whispered. The bed's large enough, and we're both adults, and it seems silly for you to sleep on the floor in your own home. Jonas went very still. Lizzie, you know what people would say. People already say terrible things about me. At least this would be my choice. She met his eyes, surprising herself with her boldness. I trust you. You've shown me more kindness and respect in 2 days than most have in years. If you're comfortable with it. He studied her for a long moment. All right, but we do this proper. You stay under the furs. I'll stay on top with my own blanket. And if you change your mind, you say so. They prepared for sleep awkwardly, trying not to watch each other. Lizzie curled up on one side of the bed, pulling the furs to her chin. Jonas lay down on the other side, on top of the covers with his own blanket, carefully maintaining distance between them. Jonas? Lizzie whispered in the darkness. What will happen when the storm ends? He was quiet for a moment. What do you want to happen? I don't know. I can't stay here forever, but going back... She trailed off. We'll figure it out, he said firmly. Together. Together, she repeated softly, tasting the word like something foreign and sweet. The wind howled on, but wrapped in warmth and safety, protected by the mountain and the man beside her. Lizzie slept better than she had in years, and Jonas, listening to her quiet breathing, felt the ice around his heart crack a little more. Outside, the blizzard raged as if trying to keep the world at bay. Inside, Two lonely souls began the cautious, tender work of learning they didn't have to be alone anymore. The storm broke on the fourth day, leaving the world transformed under a blanket of pristine white. Jonas stood at the cave entrance, studying the altered landscape with practiced eyes while Lizzie prepared breakfast behind him. They'd fallen into an easy routine during their enforced isolation. She cooked while he tended to the heavier chores, and they shared the work of maintaining their temporary household. "Trail's going to be rough," he said, turning back inside. "Snow's deep, and there'll be drifts in the passes. Might be better to wait another day." Lizzie nodded, trying to hide her relief. The thought of returning to her cold attic room and Mrs. Morrison's harsh demands filled her with dread. Here, she discovered what it felt like to be warm, fed, and treated with respect. Going back felt like volunteering for prison. "I should send word, though," she said. "Mrs. Morrison will assume I'm dead. I'll go down this afternoon. Check on folks and let them know you're safe." Jonas sat down to the simple meal she'd prepared. "You stay here where it's warm." After he left, Lizzie found herself alone in the cave for the first time. She tidied the already neat space, then sat by the fire, wrestling with thoughts that had been building for days. Living with Jonas had shown her possibilities she'd never dared imagine. He treated her as an equal, valued her opinions, never once mentioned her size except to ensure she was eating enough. Meanwhile, Jonas made his way down the treacherous mountain path, his mind equally troubled. The past days had awakened something he'd thought dead, the desire for companionship, for shared meals and quiet conversations by firelight. Lizzie's presence had transformed his cave from a refuge into something dangerously close to a home. Cedar Ridge looked like a disaster when he arrived. Several roofs had collapsed under the snow weight, and people were digging out desperately. Jonas pitched in where needed, his great strength making quick work of blocked doorways. "McCready," Samuel Hoffman called out. "Glad to see you weathered the storm. You haven't seen the Hartwell girl, have you? Mrs. Thompson's beside herself." "She's safe," Jonas said shortly. "Staying warm until the weather settles." The trader's eyes sharpened. "Staying where? Exactly?" Jonas met his gaze steadily. "Somewhere with heat and food. That's all anyone needs to know." Word spread quickly, as it always did in small towns. By the time Jonas reached the boarding house, a small crowd had gathered. "Mrs. Thompson rushed out, wringing her hands. "Mr. McCready, is it true? You have Lizzie?" "She's safe," he repeated. "I'll bring her back when the paths are clear." "But where—" She stopped, understanding dawning. Oh my. People will talk. Let them." His voice carried a warning that made several bystanders step back. From the crowd, Carl Brennan pushed forward, still sporting bruises from some drunken altercation. "So the mountain man's taken himself a woman. Didn't think you had it in you, preferring that scrawny—" He never finished. Jonas moved faster than a man his size should be able to, grabbing Brennan by the throat and lifting him clean off the ground. "You say one word about her," Jonas said quietly, "and I'll forget I'm trying to be civilized." He dropped Brennan, who scrambled away, gasping. The crowd dispersed quickly, but Jonas could hear the whispers starting already. By nightfall, everyone would know Lizzie had spent the storm in his cave, at Morrison's Laundry. He found the owner in a foul temper. 4 days of work lost, and that girl nowhere to be found. When she shows her face, you'll welcome her back and pay her fairly." Jonas interrupted. "Or I'll have a word with folks about how you've been shorting her wages and working her near to death." Mrs. Morrison's face went red, then white. "You can't prove— Try me," she huffed, but subsided. Jonas left with the satisfaction of knowing Lizzie's job was secure, though he wondered if she'd even want it anymore. His last stop was the general store. Mary Chen smiled knowingly as he entered. "Shopping for two now. Mr. McCready." He ignored the implication. "Purchasing supplies, including fabric, thread, and other things Lizzie might need." Mary wrapped everything carefully. "She's a good girl," Mary said quietly. "Whatever people say, remember that. She deserves happiness." Jonas nodded curtly and left. But her words followed him back up the mountain. He found Lizzie where he'd left her, darning one of his shirts by the fire. The domestic sight hit him like a physical blow. For a moment, he could almost see Sarah there, could almost believe the past 5 years were just a nightmare. "You didn't have to do that," he said gruffly, setting down his pack. "You've done so much for me." "It's the least I could do." She looked up anxiously. "How was town?" "Standing, mostly." He began unpacking the supplies. "Your job's safe when you go back." "Oh," her voice was small. "That's good." They prepared dinner in unusual silence, both aware that their interlude was ending. As they ate, Jonas finally spoke. "There's been talk about you staying here." Lizzie's chin lifted. "I expected as much. It'll be worse when you go back. They'll assume things. They assume things anyway." She met his eyes. "Jonas, these past days, I've never felt so respected, so safe. Whatever they say can't take that away." He studied her determined face, this tiny woman with spine of steel. "There's another option." "What do you mean?" Jonas took a breath, knowing he was about to change everything. "You could stay." The words hung between them like struck bells. Lizzie's eyes widened. "Stay?" she whispered. Not improperly." He struggled with words that had never come easily. "As my wife, if you'd have me." Lizzie's spoon clattered to the floor. "Jonas, you can't mean that. You barely know me." "I know enough." He leaned forward earnestly. "I know you work hard. Never complain. I know you're kind, even to those who mock you. I know you've made my cave feel more like home in 4 days than it's felt in 5 years." "But She gestured helplessly at herself. "Perfect." The word came out fierce. "You're perfect as you are. Let everyone else be blind. I see you, Lizzie Hartwell, and what I see is a woman worth protecting, worth providing for, worth loving, if you'd let me try." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Jonas, What if I disappoint you? What if I'm too weak for this life?" He moved around the fire, kneeling before her chair so they were eye level. "You survived years of mockery and poverty. You kept going when most would have given up. You're not weak, Lizzie. You're the strongest person I know. But people will say you settled, that you could have anyone. I don't want anyone. I want you." He took her small hands in his large ones. "If you'll have me, if you can stand living up here, away from town, if you can put up with a man who's forgotten how to be gentle but wants to remember." Lizzie looked into his weathered face, seeing the vulnerability he was offering along with his proposal. This man who'd lost everything, who'd hidden away rather than risk pain again, was opening his heart to her. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes. Jonas, I'll marry you." His face transformed with a smile that took years off his appearance. Carefully, as if she might break, he drew her into his arms. She fit perfectly against his chest, her head tucking under his chin. "We'll go to town tomorrow," he murmured into her hair. "Find the preacher, do this proper. Then you'll come home." "Home," she repeated, the word sweet as honey. "I've never had a real home before. You do now. Always." They held each other as the fire burned low. Two souls who'd found harbor in unexpected places. Outside, the winter night was cold and vast, but inside their cave was warmth and promise. Jonas pulled back slightly, looking down at her tear-stained face. "No more tears," he said gently, wiping them away with his thumb. "From now on, you cry only from joy." "These are joy," Lizzie assured him, smiling through the tears. "I just never thought, never dared hope." "Hope now," he told her. "Dream, plan. This is your life too now. Our life. Tell me what you want." They talked late into the night, making plans. Jonas would teach her to preserve meat, to identify edible plants, to read the weather signs. She would make curtains for the cave entrance, organize the supplies better, maybe even convince him to build a proper bed frame in the storage chamber so they could have a real bedroom. "And children?" Jonas asked tentatively. "Would you want—" "Yes," Lizzie said firmly. "If we're blessed, And don't start about my size. My mother was small too, and she had 3 healthy babies. I wasn't going to, he protested. I was going to say they'd be lucky to have you for a mother. Fresh tears threatened, but Lizzie blinked them back. We should sleep. Tomorrow will be a big day. They prepared for bed with new shyness, aware that tomorrow night they would share it as husband and wife. But when Lizzie shivered despite the warmth, Jonas pulled her close without hesitation. Just for warmth, he murmured. Of course, she agreed, settling against him with a contentment she'd never known existed. As sleep took them, the cave stood sentinel against the night, shelter becoming home, solitude transforming into companionship. And somewhere in the darkness between heartbeats, 2 broken people began the delicate process of becoming whole. The peace of their mountain sanctuary shattered 3 weeks after their wedding. Jonas had gone to town for supplies, leaving Lizzie to tend their home. She was hanging laundry on the line he'd strung between 2 pines when she heard the horses approaching. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, and Lizzie's blood ran cold. She recognized the lead man, Rex Colton, who'd gained infamy robbing stages between Cedar Ridge and Denver. His companions looked equally dangerous, trail-worn and armed. Well, Colton drawled, dismounting slowly. The stories are true. McCready went and got himself a little bird. Lizzie forced herself to stand straight, though her heart hammered against her ribs. My husband will return soon? Oh, we're counting on that. Colton's smile was predatory. See, your husband cost me a brother. Luke was with that gang 5 years back, the one McCready hunted down like dogs. The other men spread out, cutting off escape routes. Lizzie's mind raced. Jonas had taught her to load and shoot his spare rifle, but it was inside the cave. That's why we're here. Colton continued, moving closer. Eye for an eye. He took my family, I take his. Lizzie backed toward the cave entrance. Your brother murdered innocent people, a woman and baby. That's his story. Colton's face darkened. Luke said they were just going to scare them, get information. Fire got out of hand. Liar! The word slipped out before Lizzie could stop it. Colton's hand cracked across her face, sending her sprawling. Watch your tongue, girl. You're coming with us either way, but I'd prefer you conscious. Lizzie tasted blood, her cheek throbbing. But as Colton reached for her, she remembered Jonas's lessons. You're small, but that can be an advantage. Use their expectations against them. She cowered, letting Colton think her beaten. When he bent to grab her arm, she snatched the skinning knife from her belt and slashed at his reaching hand. He jerked back with a curse, blood dripping from his palm. Little witch! He lunged for her, but Lizzie was already moving, darting toward the cave. She almost made it. Her hand was on the door when rough hands seized her, dragging her back. The third man, silent until now, held her while Colton bound her wrists. Feisty little thing, the second rider observed. McCready teach you that? Leave a note, Colton ordered. Tell him if he wants her back breathing. He comes alone to Skeleton Ridge, midnight, 3 days from now. They threw her across a saddle like a sack of grain, and Lizzie bit her lip to keep from crying out. As they rode away, she twisted for one last look at the cave, her home, her sanctuary, perhaps lost forever. The journey was torture. They rode hard through rough country, stopping only to water the horses. Lizzie's ribs ached from the saddle, her wrists raw from the ropes. But she stayed silent, observing, planning. They made camp that night in a box canyon, posting guards. Lizzie was tied to a tree, given water but no food. Colton crouched before her, studying her bruised face. Can't see what McCready sees in you, he mused. Skinny little thing. But then, maybe he likes them helpless? I'm not helpless, Lizzie said quietly. He laughed. No. What are you going to do, girl? You're tied up, miles from anywhere. With 3 armed men, your giant's not here to protect you. He'll come. Oh, I'm counting on it. Skeleton Ridge is perfect for an ambush. High ground, no cover. He'll walk right into our guns. Colton's smile was cold. Then I'll decide what to do with you. Might keep you around for entertainment. Might sell you to the Comancheros. Or might just leave you for the coyotes." Lizzie closed her eyes, trying not to show her terror. She thought of Jonas returning to find her gone, imagined his rage and pain. He'd come for her. She knew that, like she knew the sun would rise. But he'd be walking into a trap. The second night, they grew careless. The guard dozed. The others drank whiskey by the fire. Lizzie had been working at her bonds steadily, her small wrists finally slipping free. She waited until clouds covered the moon, then made her move. She'd memorized where they kept the horses, knew which one was calmest, moving like a shadow. She crept toward the animals. Her hand was on the lead rope when a shout went up. "The girl! She's loose!" Lizzie vaulted onto the horse bareback, kicking hard. The animal leapt forward just as gunfire erupted behind her. She pressed low against its neck, praying the darkness would hide her. She rode hard through the night, branches tearing at her clothes, no idea where she was heading except away. By dawn, she was lost, exhausted, and could hear pursuit closing in. The horse stumbled in a ravine, throwing her. Lizzie hit hard, pain exploding through her shoulder. She dragged herself behind some rocks as hoofbeats thundered closer. "This is where I die," she thought, surprisingly calm. At least she'd tried. At least Jonas would know she fought. Then she heard it, a sound that made her heart leap. A rifle shot, but not from her pursuers. Another shot, and cursing, and the sound of horses retreating. "Lizzie!" Jonas's voice, raw with fear. "Lizzie, where are you?" "Here," she croaked, trying to stand. "Jonas, I'm here!" He came crashing through the brush like an avalanche, and then she was in his arms, held so tight she could barely breathe. He was shaking. This mountain of a man was actually shaking. "You're hurt," he said, seeing the blood on her face, her torn clothes. "I'm alive." She touched his face wonderingly. "How did you find me?" "Tracked them from the cave. When I saw you were gone," his voice broke. "I thought I'd lost you. Thought it was happening again." "I escaped," she said proudly. "Just like you taught me. Used my size, waited for my chance. That's my girl." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, careful of her bruises. "That's my brave girl, but they'll regroup. Come back. It's Colton, Rex Colton. He says you killed his brother." Jonas's face hardened. "Luke Colton was scum. He's the one who set the fire." "I know." Lizzie gripped his shirt. "Jonas, they planned an ambush at Skeleton Ridge. They wanted you to come alone. Instead, they got something worse." His smile was feral. "They woke the bear." He whistled, and his horse appeared, loaded with weapons. "Can you ride?" "Yes." She struggled to her feet, biting back a groan at her shoulder. "We're going to town. Sheriff needs to know about Colton. Then we're going to end this." They rode double, Lizzie safe in the circle of his arms. But as they descended toward Cedar Ridge, they saw smoke rising. The town was in chaos, buildings burning, people running. "Colton!" Jonas growled. "He's attacking the town." They could hear gunfire now, screams. Jonas reined up, torn between protecting Lizzie and helping the town that had never welcomed either of them. "Go," Lizzie said firmly. "They need you. I won't leave you." "You're not. I'm coming too." She slid down from the horse, picked up a rifle. "I'm not helpless. Remember?" He looked at her, bloody, bruised, but unbroken, and nodded. "Stay close, use cover, and Lizzie, no heroics." They entered town like avenging angels. Jonas was devastating in his fury, picking off raiders with deadly accuracy. Lizzie stayed behind cover, reloading for him, watching his back. The tide turned quickly once the townspeople realized they had help. Men who'd mocked Jonas now fought beside him. Women who'd scorned Lizzie passed her ammunition. Colton made his stand in the bank. Hostages inside. "McCready!" he shouted. "This is between us! Face me!" "Let them go," Jonas called back. "Then we'll settle this. The girl for the hostages. Fair trade." Before Jonas could respond, Lizzie stepped out. I'm here. Colton! No! Jonas lunged for her, but she was already walking forward, hands raised. Lizzie, get back here! She ignored him, keeping her eyes on Colton. Let them go. You want me, not them. Colton appeared in the doorway, gun trained on her. Smart girl. Come here. Lizzie took another step, another, behind Colton. She could see movement in the bank's window, someone creeping up behind him. I said I wasn't helpless, she said clearly. I was wrong. I am helpless, to love my husband, helpless to stand by while you hurt innocent people, but helpless to defend myself, she smiled. Never again. Colton frowned, raising his gun. What are you? The shot came from behind him. Samuel Hoffman stood in the bank, smoking rifle in hand. Colton toppled forward, dead before he hit the ground. The remaining raiders surrendered or fled. The hostages poured out of the bank, and suddenly Lizzie found herself surrounded by the same people who'd mocked her for years. That was the bravest thing I ever saw. Mrs. Morrison said, tears on her face. You saved us, another woman added. But Lizzie only had eyes for Jonas, who pushed through the crowd to sweep her into his arms. Don't ever do that again. He growled against her hair. I learned from the best. She murmured back. Sheriff Watson approached, hat in hand. McCready, Miss Lizzie, town owes you both a debt. Anything you need. Just peace. Jonas said firmly. We want to live our lives without looking over our shoulders. You'll have it. Watson promised. Colton's gang is finished, and anyone who bothers either of you will answer to me. As the crowd dispersed to fight fires and tend wounded, Jonas and Lizzie stood in the street where they'd first truly seen each other. They called me brave, Lizzie said wonderingly. You are brave. Bravest person I know. They said we saved the town. We did. She looked up at him. This man who'd given her everything. Can we go home now? Yeah, Jonas said softly, lifting her onto his horse. Let's go home. They rode out of Cedar Ridge together. No longer the mountain hermit and the town mouse, but something stronger, partners, protectors, two halves of an unexpected whole. Behind them, the town began rebuilding. Ahead, the mountains waited, offering not isolation now but sanctuary for a love that had conquered mockery, violence, and fear itself. The fever came in the night, 3 days after their return to the mountain. Lizzie woke to find Jonas burning hot beside her. His breathing labored. When she tried to rouse him, he mumbled incoherently, lost in delirium. Jonas! She pressed a hand to his forehead, alarmed by the heat. Jonas, wake up! His eyes opened but didn't focus. Sarah, he whispered. I'm sorry. Couldn't save. Lizzie's heart clenched, but she pushed aside the pain. This wasn't about her feelings. Jonas was sick, possibly dying. She'd seen men this fevered before. Without help, they rarely survived. She flew into action, drawing on every scrap of knowledge from helping her mother tend sick neighbors. Cool water from the stream for compresses, willow bark tea for the fever, if she could get him to drink. But as the hours passed and Jonas grew worse, she knew it wasn't enough. Hold on, she whispered, smoothing his sweat-soaked hair. I'm going for help. The ride to town was a nightmare. She pushed the horse hard through the pre-dawn darkness, praying she wouldn't be too late. Doctor. Marcus Holden answered his door with a shotgun, then lowered it when he saw her. Mrs. McCready? What? Jonas is dying, she said simply. Please. To his credit, the doctor didn't hesitate. Within minutes, they were racing back up the mountain, medical bag bouncing in his saddlebags. Doctor. Holden's face was grave after examining Jonas. Infection from an old wound. Looks like must have reopened during the fight. It spread to his blood. Can you help him? I can try. But I'll be honest, men his size fall harder when fever takes them. And up here, without proper facilities. He shook his head. Tell me what to do. For 3 days and nights, Lizzie barely left Jonas's side. She forced medicine between his lips, bathed his burning skin. held him when seizures racked his powerful frame. Doctor. Holden came and went, doing what he could, but the battle was Lizzie's to fight. Jonas raved in his delirium, calling for Sarah, for his lost child. Sometimes for Lizzie herself without recognizing her presence. He fought invisible enemies, wept for old grief, cried out against remembered pain. "Don't leave me," Lizzie begged, her small hands gripping his large one. "You saved me. Jonas, let me save you, please." On the third night, the fever broke. Jonas's eyes opened, clear and focused for the first time in days. "Lizzie?" She burst into tears, collapsing against his chest. "You're back. Oh, thank God, you're back." "How long?" 3 days. You almost—" She couldn't finish. His hand, weak but steady, stroked her hair. "You stayed." "Of course I stayed. Where else would I be?" "I called for her," he said quietly. "For Sarah. I remember that." Lizzie pulled back to meet his eyes. "It's all right. Fever brings up old memories." "It's not all right." His voice grew stronger. "You're my wife. You shouldn't have to hear Jonas McCready." "You listen to me." Lizzie's tone was fierce. "Sarah was your first love. She gave you a child. That grief is part of you, and I would never ask you to pretend otherwise. But I'm here now. I'm the one who fought for your life. I'm the one who refuses to let you go." He studied her face, pale with exhaustion, eyes red from crying, but radiating determination. "You're stronger than you know. I had a good teacher." She kissed his forehead. "Now rest, real rest, not fever dreams." "Doctor." Holden declared Jonas out of danger the next day, though weak as a kitten. "Your wife saved your life," he told Jonas bluntly. "Another man would have given up, called for the preacher, but she fought like a wildcat for you." After the doctor left, Jonas insisted on sitting up despite Lizzie's protests. "I need to say something. You need to rest, Lizzie." His tone stopped her. "When I was fevered, I saw things, memories, but mixed up. Sarah was there, but so were you, all tangled together." She waited, heart pounding. "I realized something. For 5 years, I've been dead inside, going through motions, surviving but not living. Then you came along." He reached for her hand. "Sarah was my past, but you're my present, my future, my resurrection. Jonas, I need you to know, it's not about replacing her or forgetting. It's about choosing to live again, choosing you, every day. I choose you." Lizzie couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she crawled carefully into bed beside him, mindful of his weakness. They held each other as spring sunlight streamed through the cave entrance. Recovery was slow. Jonas chafed at his weakness, frustrated by needing help with simple tasks. But Lizzie was patient, firm, and occasionally bossy in a way that secretly delighted him. "I can walk to the stream myself," he grumbled one morning. "No, you can't. You nearly fell yesterday." "That was yesterday. I'm stronger now." "Prove it. Stand up without swaying." He tried and failed, sinking back with a curse. Lizzie hid her smile as she helped him up, supporting him with her small frame. "How are you doing this?" he wondered. "You're half my size." "Less than half," she corrected cheerfully. "But I'm stubborn, and I love you." Amazing what those two things together can accomplish. As Jonas grew stronger, spring bloomed around them. Lizzie discovered the meadow he'd described, carpeted with wildflowers. They picnicked there on good days, Jonas leaning against a tree while she wove flower crowns like a girl. "You're different," he observed one afternoon. "More yourself." She considered this. "I spent so long trying to be invisible, to not take up space. But up here, with you, I don't have to shrink. I can just be—" "You were never meant to shrink. You were meant to bloom." He tucked a columbine behind her ear. "Like these flowers, small but perfect." Town visits became less fraught. Word had spread about their actions during the raid, and the same people who'd mocked them now nodded respectfully. Some even smiled. "Mrs. McCready. Mrs." Morrison called out during one trip. Might I have a word? Lizzie tensed, but the laundry owner's face was humble. I owe you an apology. The way I treated you, it was shameful. It's past, Lizzie said simply. No, it needs saying. You saved lives that day. Mine included. I was in that bank. She pressed a package into Lizzie's hands. Just some fabric. Thought you might like it for curtains or such. It was fine cotton, far better than anything Lizzie had owned. She accepted it graciously, understanding this was about more than fabric. Things are changing, she told Jonas as they rode home. You changed them, showed them courage comes in all sizes. We changed them, she corrected. Together. That evening, as they sat by their fire, Jonas pulled out a small wooden box. I made something while I was recovering. Inside lay a carved wooden ring, delicate despite being fashioned by large hands. Mountain flowers wound around the band in intricate detail. Our wedding was rushed, he said. You deserved better, deserved a proper ring. Jonas, it's beautiful. She held out her hand, watching him slide it on. It fit perfectly. Like you, he said simply. Beautiful and perfect. They were quiet for a moment. Then Lizzie spoke. I was so scared. When you were sick, I thought I'd lose you just when I'd found you. Takes more than fever to kill a mountain man, especially when he's got something to live for. He pulled her close. Someone to live for. Do you miss it? The solitude? Jonas considered. Sometimes. But then I see you here, making our cave a home, singing while you work. And I think this is what I was waiting for. I just didn't know it. I love you, she said, words she'd been too shy to speak before. And I love you, little bird, more than these mountains, more than life. They sat together as darkness fell. Two souls who'd found healing in each other. Outside, the mountains stood eternal guard. Inside, love had transformed a cave into a home, two broken people into a family. We should add that bedroom you mentioned. Jonas said suddenly, might need more space soon. Lizzie smiled against his chest, her hand moving to her still flat stomach. She'd planned to tell him tomorrow, but somehow he already knew. Might, she agreed softly. His arms tightened around her, and she felt him smile into her hair. Strong like their mother. That's what they'll be. Gentle like their father. Perfect, he murmured. Like their mother. The fire crackled, sending sparks up into the darkness. But the real warmth came from two hearts beating as one. From love that had conquered death itself. From hope growing new life in the shelter of the mountains. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight they were together, whole and home. Spring arrived in the mountains like a benediction, melting the last stubborn patches of snow and awakening the earth. Lizzie stood at the cave entrance, one hand resting on her rounded belly, watching Jonas work on their new addition. He'd been building for weeks now, a proper bedroom carved deeper into the mountain, with a wooden floor and real glass windows he'd hauled up from town. You're going to wear yourself out, she called, though her voice held more fondness than concern. Jonas straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. Want it finished before the baby comes? You deserve better than sleeping in the main cave. I've been perfectly happy, she protested, but he was already back to work, determined to provide for his growing family. The transformation in their lives still amazed her sometimes. The cave had become a true home. Curtains at the windows, shelves lined with preserves she'd put up, a rocking chair Jonas had made positioned by the fire. But more than the physical changes, it was the emotional landscape that had altered beyond recognition. Where once there had been loneliness, now there was companionship. Where there had been mere survival, now there was joy. And where there had been fear, now there was fierce, protective love. Mrs. McCready! A voice called from the trail. Are you home? Lizzie turned to see Mary Chen approaching, accompanied by Dr. Holden. They'd become regular visitors, part of the small circle of friends that had somehow formed around the couple once shunned by society. Mary, doctor, what brings you up here? Can't an old man check on his favorite patient? Doctor, Holden dismounted, helping Mary down. "Wanted to see how you're progressing." As the doctor examined her in the privacy of the cave, Mary chatted with Jonas outside. "Samuel wanted to come too, but the store was busy. He sent this." She produced a package. "Baby clothes. His mother made them." Jonas accepted the gift with gruff thanks, still uncomfortable with kindness, but learning to receive it. "Lizzie will be pleased. The whole town's talking about the baby." Mary continued. "Some of the women want to organize a quilting bee. Make sure you have everything you need." "We don't need charity." "It's not charity, Jonas. It's community." Mary's voice was gentle but firm. "You and Lizzie showed this town what courage looks like. Let them show gratitude in return." Inside, Dr. Holden was concluding his examination. "Everything looks perfect. Baby's positioned well, heartbeat strong. You're built small, but your mother was too," you said. "Yeah, she always said the small ones surprise you." "Indeed they do." He packed his instruments. "Another month, I'd say, maybe less. You'll send Jonas for me when the time comes. If he doesn't faint first." Lizzie laughed. "He's more nervous than I am." "That's love," the doctor said simply. "After what he went through before, well, it's natural he'd worry." They gathered outside where Jonas had set up a rough table under the pines. Lizzie served coffee and the cake Mary had brought, and for an hour they talked of ordinary things: the weather, town gossip, plans for the future. After their guests left, Jonas pulled Lizzie close. "Doc says everything's good?" "Perfect. Stop worrying." "Can't help it. You're everything to me. Both of you." She reached up to touch his face, still marveling that this gentle giant was hers. "We're strong, remember? Like our love." As the weeks passed, spring deepened into early summer. The meadow blazed with color, and Jonas often carried Lizzie there when walking became difficult. They'd lie in the grass, his hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. "What should we name them?" Lizzie asked one afternoon. "Sarah, if it's a girl," Jonas said without hesitation. "If you don't mind." "I'd be honored. And for a boy, Thomas. But also," he paused, "maybe Thomas Herbert, after your father?" Lizzie's eyes filled. "Papa would have loved you, Mama too." "They always said I'd find someone who saw my worth. Didn't have to look hard. It shines from you." When her time came, it was just after dawn. Jonas woke to find Lizzie gripping his hand, her face tight with pain. "It's starting," she whispered. He was dressed and saddling the horse in record time, but Lizzie stopped him. "No time. The baby's coming now." "But the doctor, Jonas." Her voice was calm despite the pain. "Remember what you told me? Mountain women have been doing this forever. We're strong." He wanted to argue, but another contraction gripped her, and he knew she was right. Drawing on every bit of field medicine he knew, Jonas prepared for the arrival of their child. The sun was fully up when the baby's cry filled the cave. Jonas held his son, tiny, perfect, with Lizzie's delicate features and his own dark hair. "Thomas Herbert McCready," Lizzie whispered, exhausted but radiant. "Look what we made." Jonas couldn't speak past the tightness in his throat. He placed the baby in Lizzie's arms, then wrapped them both in his embrace. The circle was complete, past grief transformed into present joy. Dr. Holden arrived hours later, having been summoned by a neighbor who'd seen Jonas's emergency signal fire. He found mother and baby doing beautifully. Father still in shock. "Delivered him yourself?" The doctor was impressed. "Well done." "Lizzie did the work. I just caught him." "We did it together," Lizzie corrected. "Like everything else." News of the birth spread quickly. Over the following days, visitors trooped up the mountain bearing gifts: blankets, clothes, food, toys carved by local craftsmen. Even Mrs. Morrison came, awkwardly presenting a beautifully embroidered christening gown. "It's too much," Lizzie protested to Jonas one evening, surveying their cave now crowded with offerings. "It's what you deserve, what you always deserved." He kissed her forehead. They just needed time to see it. The christening took place in the meadow, with half the town in attendance. Reverend Patterson, who'd married them in a rushed ceremony months before, now performed a proper blessing. Thomas slept through it all, secure in his mother's arms. Funny how things change. Samuel Hoffman mused afterward. Year ago, folks were saying no man would want you. Now you've got the best man in the territory and a beautiful son. Size isn't everything, Lizzie replied with dignity. The heart matters more. As summer progressed, life settled into a new rhythm. Jonas worked his trap lines with Thomas secured to his chest in a carrier Lizzie had fashioned. She tended their expanded garden, preserved food for winter, and marveled at how their isolated cave had become a gathering place for friends. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Jonas spoke. Never thought I'd have this again. Family, home, hope. Neither did I, Lizzie admitted. I thought I'd die alone in that cold attic, unwanted and unloved. They mocked her as too small, Jonas said softly, quoting his own words from that day in the market. But she's perfect for me. Still? Lizzie asked, though she knew the answer. Always, forever. You're my heart. Lizzie McCready. You and Thomas both. The baby stirred at his name, and Lizzie adjusted him in her arms. We should go in, getting cold. Jonas stood, helping her up with the same gentle care he'd shown from the beginning. Doc says you're healing well, strong as ever. Stronger, she corrected. Love makes us stronger. They walked into their cave, their home, as the first stars appeared overhead. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal. Before them, a future bright with possibility stretched like a promise. In the warmth of their dwelling, Jonas lit the lamps while Lizzie settled Thomas in his cradle. The space that had once echoed with loneliness now hummed with life. Tell me again, Lizzie said, moving into her husband's arms. He knew what she wanted to hear. They mocked her as too small, he began, voice tender. Said she was too weak, too fragile. But I saw the truth, saw her strength, her courage, her heart too big for her tiny frame. And you declared to everyone, she's perfect for me. He tilted her chin up, meeting those brown eyes that had first caught him with their dignity amid tears. Perfect then, perfect now, perfect always. They stood together in the lamplight, Mountain Man and his small wife, their baby sleeping peacefully nearby. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, but inside was safety, warmth, and love. The girl too small to matter had found her place. The man too broken to love had found healing. Together, they'd built something stronger than mockery, deeper than loss, more enduring than the mountains themselves. They'd built a life worth living. They'd built a love worth dying for. They'd built a home. As the fire crackled and night deepened around their sanctuary, Jonas and Lizzie McCready held each other close, grateful for the journey that had brought them together. In the morning, there would be chores and challenges. But tonight, there was only this, the quiet triumph of two souls who'd found their perfect match in the most imperfect of circumstances. Love had conquered all, and in the end, that was the only measure that mattered. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me on this Wild West love story. If you've enjoyed the tale of Jonas and Lizzie, I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about their journey. Your support means everything to us storytellers of the frontier.